my phone off, considering that we're making a recording.
That's a good idea.
That's a good idea. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. Please ensure that your cell phones are in the silent mode for the duration of the podcast. Okay. Hey, hello everyone. Today is October 24th, 2015. You're looking at episode 15 of Percussion. I'm your host, Casey Cangelosi, and with me today are Laurel Black.
Hi.
And Ben Charles.
Hi, everybody.
Megan Arns is not with us today, but we have a really, really cool guest, of course. And this guest does not need any introduction, because if you know what percussion is and if you know what a marimba is, then you certainly know who this person is. But Gordon Stout, certainly one of my heroes still today, and since I was very young, and since I've sort of become a professional, if you will. He's been a wonderful mentor and just kind friend and super wonderful person in the percussion scene. And of course, if you don't know, he is just one of the biggest names and a common household name in percussion, and especially marimba as a composer and also a virtuoso. So please welcome from Ithaca, New York, Gordon Stout.
Well, thank you very much, Casey. I appreciate it, and it's nice to be here.
Cool. Thanks very much. So, Ben, what are you doing there in Ithaca right now?
Real quick, I just want to say one of my favorite things I've ever heard about Gordon Stout is that he was once called the Arthur Rubinstein of the marimba, which I think is totally cool.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Hey, Ben. Hey, Ben. Look what I got right here.
All right.
Do you know what this is? I also have this right here.
Wow. Yeah, when I was skinny and I could turn sideways and disappear when I was young.
He actually, that picture, the Mexican dances picture, he has hanging on his wall right here in front of us.
Is that right?
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Can I pull that off the wall and show
You may.
Excellent.
Cool.
He also the kind of woodcut cover from one of his albums is on this wall.
Nice.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Wow, very cool. So,
anyway,
of course,
that's what I'm doing in Ithaca. That's a roundabout way of getting it. I have a friend named Kate Vorel that is one of Gordon's current students, and she asked me to come play on one of her master's recitals. So I flew up here this morning at 6 a.m. and played on her recital at 1.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that's not a bad deal to get to drop in and hang with Gordon Stout. Well, hey, let's just try to get through our things, because I think we have a lot of really nice Facebook questions for Gordon. And please, Gordon, speak as our topics come through. We definitely want to hear from you. So don't be afraid to take the limelight away from Ben. I do it all the time. It's really fun. So Ben, what do you have for us today?
So this episode, I think we determined is going to be released the week of PASIC this year, but if not the week of, sometime right before or right after. So today I thought I would give a little bit of history about the Percussive Art Society and their international convention, which we commonly call PASIC. So there's a great just history section on the PAS website that I got basically all of this information from, if anyone's interested in reading a little deeper. But the idea for having a Percussive Art Society was sparked by 14 percussionists and educators who met for dinner at the 1960 Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic. Some of the names jumped out at me that I knew were Remo Bailey, of course, of Remo, Warren Benson, and there was one other, Jack McKenzie, who taught at the University of Illinois. Were all kind of names that popped out to me, and Robert Winslow also. So anyway, they created the goal to bring up to date the present standards in solo and ensemble contests, stimulate a greater interest in percussion performance and teaching, and promote better teaching of percussion instruments. So this was 1960. They kind of formally founded the Percussive Art Society in 1961. In September 1961, they sent their first Percussive Art Society Bulletin, which is the predecessor to what we know as Percussive Notes. In 1964, they kind of got a little more official and adopted a constitution and actually elected officers. Before, they just kind of had people stepping in and serving as they were able. Gordon Peters was the first president, Jack McKenzie was the first vice president, and Don Kennedy was the executive secretary. Then as the years went on, in 1971, PAS started sponsoring Day of Percussion events. which today they still have. Usually every single state has either one or multiple, if it's a very large state, day of percussion events that have guest artists that come in and do clinics and so on. In 1972, the Percussive Art Society started their Hall of Fame, and some of the Hall of Fame inductees include Saul Goodman, who was in the first year, 1972, inducted, Keiko Abe, who was the first woman inducted, I believe, in 1992, somewhere around there. I don't have the date in front of me. Chloe Duff, Steve Gadd, all the members of Nexus, John Cage, Claire Omar Musser, and a more recent inductee, Mr. Gordon Stout himself, right here. So we are amongst royalty in the percussion world. In 1974, the Percussive Art Society held their first national conference, known as PASNC, Percussive Art Society National Conference, in Anaheim and at Cal State Northridge. Let's see here. The first PASIC, as we know it, was hosted in 1976 at the Eastman School by John Beck, who Mr. Stout also performed at that event, which I'm sure we'll hear about in a minute. The current Percussive Art Society is about 7,000 members, with 50 chapters throughout the U.S. and 28 chapters outside of the U.S. And this year's Hall of Fame inductees, which are being inducted at PASIC, are Mike Balter, Dennis DeLucia, and Double Image, which is Dave Friedman and Dave Samuels, the duo there. So that's kind of PAS and PASIC in a nutshell. So Gordon, you played at the first PASIC, and I remember when I was studying in Illinois, Bill Mersch talked about going to the first PASIC, and he said this might have been the first time he had actually seen you, and he said Gordon played either the first Mexican dance or both Mexican dances, I can't remember, and at the time it blew people's minds how like insanely difficult that marimba piece was, which it's still a difficult piece, but by today's standards, some of the more advanced repertoire is even more difficult than that. So.
Yeah, I was lucky to be involved in that very first PASIC. John Beck asked me to come back, and I was a first-year college teacher right out of school with my master's degree, and I thought, well, yeah, I like to play marimba. It's something I always did. I always wrote music, but I was really a college percussion teacher and a percussionist, not necessarily a marimba soloist. And so when John asked me to come back, I did that, shared a concert with Lee Howard Stevens, and we were instantly, catapulted into this status of being marimba stars and virtuosi.
And I believe, if my memory serves me correct, Lee Stevens played the tambourine chinois, and you accompanied him on marimba. Is that
the other way around?
Okay, you played the solo part. He played the
I played the two Mexican dances, both of them. I don't remember everything, but I did play Buster Bailey's piece, Two Sticks in Search of a Waltz, which is the very end of his book on marimba.
Gotcha. Yes.
I think Lee played two or three of the Hellbull preludes, maybe some other things, maybe even Grand Fantasy, I can't recall. And then we finished by working together on Tambourine Chinois. I played the solo part, and Lee played the piano.
And did you play it on marimba or xylophone?
On marimba.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, yeah, and at the time people thought, well, those Mexican dances, those are very cool, but they're so hard that only Gordon will ever be able to play them.
Like a familiar comment I've heard.
And now, of course, there are 12-year-old kids out there around the world that can play them better than I ever did. But in 1976, it was kind of cutting edge, I guess.
I still think they're really challenging. I'm sorry, Dan.
No, I didn't have anything. Go ahead.
I still think they're really challenging. I mean, especially, and I was going to say, the middle section of the first movement, the B section, it was really probably my first introduction and love of anything really contemporary. I think I had heard things, but that was probably the first piece of contemporary music I had really played that sounded, contemporary at all. And the rhythms and the harmonies were so out there to me, and it really gave me a appreciation for it, and was kind of that, as they call it, the gateway listening drug into more complex music. It was Gordon's Mexican dance. Hey, speaking of your playing, we got so many good questions from Facebook for Mr. Stout, and I'd like to just go to one about your
Okay.
technique real quick. Ted Jackson says, how exactly did you come up with your four-mallet grip, and how do you achieve smaller intervals using it?
Well, I did not come up with the grip myself. It was taught to me by my first teacher, James Salmon, who I studied with at the University of Michigan as a teenager and young percussionist and teenager before going to Eastman with John Beck. So he taught me that grip when I was very, very young because he didn't think my hands were big enough and strong enough for Musser grip. He was a Musser student, played in the King George Marimba Symphony International, and played Musser's technique. So he crossed the sticks and as a trainer grip, and then and stronger, he would pull the sticks out more towards the end, and there was Musser grip. But he never made that change, and I didn't even know that that was his intention until years after I was studying with him. And I asked him, why do I play with this technique that nobody else in the world seems to do? And that's what he told me.
You know, speaking of the different techniques, there always, especially amongst young people, is this feverish argument about what grip is better and what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Do you, with all your experience, and I think I know where you would sit on this, but have your feelings changed about that topic, or do you even like address it with young people, or do you?
My feelings have changed in that I don't like to address it anymore. I think we're past the point of talking about one technique being better than another because.
Yay!
Yay!
Yeah.
I mean, you go somewhere and you find somebody who plays traditional grip, and it's like they're absolutely amazing. So traditional grip is the best. Then you see Dave Friedman or Bill Mersch or other people that play with Burton grip, or you see Gary Burton play with Burton grip, and it's like, oh my God, that's amazing, etc. So there are players out there that play beautifully with all the different techniques, and there are players that play with modification of one technique or another, and it's just you find a way to play. Like Theodore Milkoff, the rising star that people will know about soon in this country, I hope. He said, I just found a way to play.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, it's hard to believe that everybody doesn't know about him already. He's amazing.
I know.
Well, I've used him actually very recently, just in a discussion with a friend, on the exact topic of like, well, what is it that this grip can do versus that one? And it's like, well, look at this, look at this guy. It's like no one else is doing that,
On that note, I had a question I wanted to ask Gordon, because obviously Gordon's been around as a percussionist and percussion teacher a lot longer than any of us. And that is, how have you seen percussion students evolve throughout your teaching career in terms of their interests, their technical abilities, their ideas on technique and tone and anything really?
One thing I find is that they seem to be getting younger. That's a joke. Actually, I get older, but it seems like the kids are getting younger, right?
I actually totally interpreted that seriously, like they're younger, like their attitude,
like 11 years old.
There are a lot of influences, now that marimba is part of the college curriculum, and now that drum corps are so big and young kids are playing mallet instruments at an age far younger than they were when I was growing up. A lot of kids are playing very, very well at much younger ages in this country, and I think even around the world. So I do find that the level of virtuosity in young kids is far exceeded what was in my generation. I think if anything is lacking, sometimes it's the musical development. You see these kids that have amazing techniques, and yet they've never listened to a Beethoven symphony. They've never listened to a Bartók string quartet. They don't even know who Bartók is, etc. So they seem to be missing some of that background in music that I went through and learned when I was a kid, and that informs, I think, in a very good way how you play music in a more contemporary sense.
Ben is single-handedly fixing that and through at Percussion. They're going to know Bartok. At least Bartok. We have a Bartok episode. Ben, thanks so much for that question, because actually that really applies to Will Marinelli's question from Facebook, which was exactly that. What kind of changes have you seen over the years? So that's wonderful. You know, while we're kind of on the topic, Carlos Johnson asks, what are your thoughts on the evolution of marimba mallets and stance on rosewood conservation?
Historically speaking, when I was young, I had 2 pairs of Musser yellow rubber sticks on rattan handles, and that's what I learned to play marimba with. Those are the only 2 sticks I had for 3 or 4 years, and it wasn't until much later that I got to have my first set of yarn mallets that was for the low register. So, you know, in that day there were Musser mallets and there were Deegan mallets, period. They either sounded good in the low register, not in the upper register, or vice versa, but there were not mallets back then that you could use over the entire range of the instrument for solo work. So, you know, myself and some other people started experimenting with making mallets in the 70s, and now it's proliferated. I taught Dan Lidster how to wrap mallets at some point when he was studying with me privately. He owns Encore Mallets. So I've been wrapping sticks my entire life, and I continue to do it, and I continue to come up with new and better sticks all the time. So I think it's an ever-evolving art. As our art of playing and literature evolves, so does the implement with which we play the marimba.
Do you have your students make mallets?
I recommend that they do. Some of them do, and some don't.
Yeah, it's kind of something that I think a lot of the younger generation, myself included, I've never wrapped a marimba mallet. I've played with a lot of different ones, but yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so surprising.
Yeah, especially I'm super picky about my sound too, so it's kind of surprising to me that I haven't. But
question I actually used to wrap them all the time. I haven't in a long time. I would make one really pretty one, and like the crown is even and it looks good, and as they continued on, I would get less and less patient until the last one, like the crown is like that, and I'm just like, I don't care. This has been taking forever. I'm done, you know. But you know, speaking of that, Gordon, do you think it has anything to do with technique as far as how much the yarn deteriorates? Do you think students that have more experience and or maybe play with better technique, their mallets last longer? Or is that a myth?
I don't know that anybody's ever studied that, but I do believe there may be some truth to that, yes.
That's what I've noticed in myself and with other people, and you see it with young drummers too. They play drum set, they break sticks all the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But yeah, you don't seem to see professional drummers break sticks at the same rate like kids do. So I just wonder if it kind of correlates. Laurel, what do you?
I have a question.
I was going to say, you want to do the other part of that question on rosewood conservation?
Yeah, it was.
Kind of a 2-parter.
Well, I don't know where the situation is going to go, but it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. There isn't as much rosewood left. As I understand from Ron Samuels, who seems to be one of the leading experts because he has people in Central America that are his employees, but he said that now you cannot cut or export rosewood from Belize. And who knows, maybe it'll be the same in Mexico and Honduras before much longer. So yeah, it's a disturbing situation. I don't know where it's going to go. It's indicative of tropical hardwoods from all over the world as tropical rainforests get clear-cut and leveled, and there's an incredible black market in exotic hardwoods. I think Ron Samuels told me that the brother of the president of Belize is the main exporter of rosewood illegally to China for building furniture. Yes. I don't know if that's really true, but I would imagine things like that are happening as we speak.
Sure.
Real quick.
Yeah.
There are drum companies, by the way, building snare drums out of Honduras rosewood. That really bugs me.
Yeah, you know, Fernando Meza has a connection in Costa Rica, marimba manufacturer that is using a different material, and I did get a chance to play on this, and it seems like it's viable. You know, it seems like it's totally a possibility, and I don't know anything about that wood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you guys know why it's called Rosewood, by the way? I learned this relatively recently from Mark Ford.
No.
Because it's rosy looking.
No, that's what I always guess is because it looks, reddish. But it's actually because when they cut it, it smells like roses.
Huh.
Yeah. Apparently.
I can also see Mark Ford just like telling you something and be like, dude, check this out.
This was real. This was real.
He's gonna say this on his podcast.
Mark Ford also one time fixed my garbage disposal with a marimba bar, but that's another story.
Well, I do know that the dust caused by cutting rosewood is not good to ingest into your lungs at all. It will cause serious health problems.
Oh, goodness.
All sorts of facts about rosewood today.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks, Carlos.
Here I thought music was good for the planet.
Laurel, what do you got today?
Yeah, well, I actually have a question for Gordon that kind of goes on this whole mallet thing.
Yes.
Just a short preface, as a student, there were those that just kind of had the basic mallets and would do everything that they could with that, and then there were other students that would spend like $800 a semester on mallets, and it seemed like the teacher would adapt to each kind of student. But I'm wondering, for you in your teaching, the balance between when do you say you need another mallet, and when do you say can you create a different sound with what you have? If you could talk about that.
Yeah, very good. For a while, 2 or 3 years, I played with one set of sticks, everything, because I didn't want the stick to necessarily be responsible for the way I sounded. I wanted, like a violinist plays with one bow, and they can put different colors. So I figured I'm going to, for a while, play with just this one set of sticks and make my technique generate the different tone colors and different sounds in the way that I play the marimba. I sort of got away with that, away from that, because I found I really wanted a special stick for wood that sings or a different stick for sedimental structures. So now I have 5 or 6 different sets of sticks, but I'm always experimenting. What I tell my students is that they can, number one, they can save a lot of money by wrapping their own, because the material that goes into a set of 4 mallets is about $5 or $6, and you're paying $70, $80 for a set. So as a starving college student, you can save a lot of money by wrapping your own, and you can wrap them for the specific piece, the specific sound that you're looking for, the specific instrument you're playing on, so you can tailor-make what you make to the sounds that you're hearing in your ears. And that's a good thing as a percussionist, not just a marimba player. But you make your own timpani mallets, you make your own bass drum mallets for the same reason. You make your own tam-tam mallets, etc., so you can get just the right sound. Does that answer all of what you were asking?
Thank you. Yeah, it does, and it's actually a cool segue into what I want to talk about today, because it takes the kind of creativity of music making, out of just the practice room and performance. So it's a fantastic segue. To get into my topic, I just wanted to ask the 3 of you a question that has to do with how do you deal with a kind of a performance block, or a creative block, if you will, when you're either overwhelmed or underwhelmed, but maybe you have to play this concert and you're supposed to find all of this, musical expression meant to hopefully inspire people. But what are maybe your 3 you guys, your favorite ways to try to get through that block?
I just want to also start off our discussion with, there's a great Leonard Bernstein quote about this exact thing, and he says, all you need to accomplish great things is something like a great idea and not quite enough time.
I've heard this. Yeah.
Interesting.
I love that. But the piece that I just played here, earlier today. I played the Ignatowicz Passacaglia for marimba and vibraphone, and my friend Kate asked me less than a month ago, I think it was, if I would come to Ithaca and play on her recital, and told me what piece I had to play, which I'd never played before. And I guess it's something I kind of learned from studying with Svet Stoyanov, is like, you just kind of don't whine about it, just lock yourself in a room and keep on working at it. And if it doesn't happen in time, it doesn't happen in time. But as of yet, when I've had situations like this, it's always, if I don't spend time whining about it, I actually kind of seem to get it done, whatever it is.
Yeah, and you know, the way I interpreted the question is, it's not so much getting it done in time or achieving it. It's like, if you're not feeling it, you know, if you're, you know, you can't. But I actually have a similar answer. It's kind of like, I would like a solution to that, actually, because I think the answer for me is, yeah, that's tough and too bad, and out you go, do it, try to fool them into thinking you are feeling it. And yeah, I don't know. I hope to find a way to pull it out even when it's not there.
I think we're all still searching for the ways to do that better. When I played at the second Lee Howard Stevens competition, I was playing Northern Lights, and I walked out on stage and I knew within about 15 seconds that it was really going to suck. It just wasn't happening. I didn't feel it.
Yeah.
I was devastated in my mind, but I was playing, and I knew I had 14 more minutes to go. So I just kind of, you know, said, okay, come on, keep it together. Let's do the best we can. Let's listen to the sound. Let's see, you know, make some good music. Let's listen. Let's think about the music. And I finished with it, and I guess people still liked it because they applauded. But it was one of those performances that I was always remember as being really awful in my own mind.
Yeah.
I tell my students it's okay to strive for perfection, but it's unreasonable to expect it of yourself. So you just learn that you're going to make mistakes, and most of the time the audience doesn't even know if you make a mistake, and oftentimes they don't even care if you make a mistake if the music is strong. So I think you always have to come back to listening to the sound of the instrument and playing the music.
I have experienced that. I am really feeling it, and I am really into it, and I make a terrible mistake, and I just don't care. You know, even along the lines of like, I don't even know what's next, and don't care. Keep going. I'm feeling so good. You know, that it's interesting. The opposite can happen too.
Yeah. In performance, I don't care. I just let things happen. If you start caring, then you start thinking about things that have happened in the past, and then you're not thinking where you are, and then you make the problem worse.
Yeah, which I think that's we kind of talked about the difference between recording and performing with Ian Rosenbaum a little bit of like, when it's on a recording, it's almost less fun because you really do have to be focused about getting it perfect because it's going to be there for years to come. Whereas a live performance, you know, even if you're recording it, you can just not post that part on YouTube or whatever if you're not happy with it. But I think live performing is really fun because if you make a mistake, it doesn't stick around. It's just gone, and you can still have a great performance for the rest of the piece.
Yeah, and there's something that Messiaen talked about, the joy of imperfection. You know, things can happen as a result of mistakes and things that happen in live performance that you could never predict.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're the really most wonderful elements that, you know, you didn't plan and you couldn't predict that they happened, but they did. And I think it's just being open to that as a performer that's part of what it's all about.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Well, my topic today is the very end of the book Creativity that I've been talking about by the positive psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. The last chapter is about enhancing our personal creativity, and he means this in every single way possible. He means, as you know, not just in our work or in our professional lives, but you know, in our inner lives and in our relationships as well. And there's a little quote that I just love and sums up the entire chapter, so I'll read that now. But he writes, "To free up creative energy, we need to let go and divert some attention from the pursuit of the predictable goals and use it instead to explore the world around us on its own terms. And then I paraphrased it in my own words, in other words, to learn to see things as they are rather than as we expect them or think that they should be. So this actually totally applies to what everyone has been saying about live performance and how we get surprised sometimes by a mistake, and you have to keep going. But even have to is not the right word, because there's a certain joy in the fact that you get to keep going, that you don't have to stop and push re-record to start all over again. But Mihaly talks about ways to awaken and protect and then internalize this feeling of creativity. And one of the things he says, to awaken your own. So if you're perhaps standing backstage and it's like, I really don't want to be here, I really want to go home, I want to watch Netflix, he says try to stay curious and interested in something. Just curious and interested. And to find a way to be surprised by something every single day. And if you need to, write it down before you go to sleep. And if you start doing that, you'll notice that you see things about the world around you that can serve as these moments of inspiration that can keep us moving when we otherwise may stop. And that, to me, makes me think of when we're teaching students and they come in and they're wearing their pajamas and they smell like they haven't showered and they've been up all night doing all of this work, and you want them to make some music in front of you and they are just exhausted, and it's like they don't even have time to see what's around them because they are so busy always. And I think this could be a great way to start a conversation with them about, well, here's how you can start to go past that, because muscling through it works sometimes, but not always. But maybe just try to look around you a little bit. So once you've found something that is surprising and piques a curiosity, he says follow it, no matter what it is. If it's interesting, follow it. And then you want to protect that new energy that you have, and he says you can do that by taking charge of your schedule, by realizing that being busy does not equal being of value, that busyness does not equal great work. And I think that's a great lesson, because we can easily overwork ourselves, especially in our field. I have a lot of friends that it just seems like they never stop, and some of them have the energy and the temperament for it, and maybe some of them don't. I don't, and I've learned to admit that, and it's a little embarrassing in some ways, but in other ways it is good, because it's not in my personality. But lastly, in terms of integrating these ideas of how to enhance our personal creativity, he suggests to shift often from openness to closure. And by that he means being open and vulnerable to seeing the beautiful things in the world, to, when you're in the practice room, if the music hits you hard, to let that happen. Or maybe you're in a lesson, it hits you hard, you let that happen. But then that there are also moments when you need to shut that off so that you can just do the work. And that sounds, we've all done that, and that's kind of what it sounded like you were saying, Ben, that you just shut yourself in the room and you do the work. You kind of turn yourself off in some ways so that you can get something done. But lastly, he finishes nearly the entire book with the following. Good scientists, like good artists, must let their minds roam playfully, or they will not discover new facts, new patterns, new relationships. At the same time, they must also be able to evaluate critically every novelty they encounter, forget immediately the spurious ones, and then concentrate their minds on developing and realizing the few that are promising.
You know what? This sounds a lot like, in certain parallels to me. Are you guys familiar with the John Cage 10 Rules for Teachers and Students? or for students and teachers. I think it's
John who? Sorry.
John Cage.
I think I've heard of those. Yes.
I pulled it up here, and some of this, like, it sounds exactly like what Laurel's talking about. But rule number 1 is find a place you trust, and then try trusting it for a while. And then his general duties of a student: pull everything out of your teacher, pull everything out of your fellow students. General duties as a teacher: pull everything out of your students. Consider everything an experiment. Be self-disciplined. And you can look up the whole list online. I won't read all 10, but it's a lot of the same kind of themes going through.
I had a test question, a take-home test question when I taught music history, and it was memorize a John Cage quote, like one of the longer ones, and then write like a brief essay explaining your interpretation of it and its value and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's cool.
It's cool. It's such a beautiful topic of conversation. You know, like find a place you trust, and I don't know, just be yourself in that place.
And continue to be curious. It's like if you're losing interest, that you're not curious anymore. I like that. It's like we said an episode or two ago about the opera workshop, Laurel. It's nice that these other musicians have like a system in their regular performance of getting them to perform. It's not just about hitting the right notes and the right technique and everything, but they were talking so much about performance, and it seems like something we said before was it would be nice if we had, I don't know, something that we kind of regularly did to help ourselves and our students feel more like performers and not just technicians, you know?
Yeah, and I think that, like, the thing I want to make sure that's in my brain that comes out is that, you know, he's talking about when you're a creative person, you're curious and interested, and I think that fuels good performance. Like, before we learn how to be good performers, we have to be incredibly interested in what we're doing and have this, like, insatiable energy to figure it out. And to be willing to investigate what the piece has to tell us. Like, Casey and I talked a lot about that opera workshop, Gordon, that he referenced, where we're watching these students, you know, get worked with by this coach who is a pianist, but also has theater training, and, you know, they're talking about character and objective because they have the advantage of text, you know, and because they have this very specific role, literally, that they have to play in this particular song. But I'm of the thinking that, you know, if my mind is in the right creative place, anything I play could take on that kind of meaning for me. And what's cool, and that Mihaly says, and that we also talked about, Casey, with your dad, Jim, who was on just a few weeks ago, is that when you're in a creative place, it only has to make sense to you. You know, and I think as performers, that's cool. We make decisions for ourselves, and then people hear what they want to hear, but I think we have to make those decisions in the first place.
So this actually, I think, relates a lot to two other Facebook questions we have, and one, I guess, is about this changing and evolving. Chris Scarberry would like to ask Mr. Stout, has your performance of your older works evolved since their first publishing, and how so? Example, do you still perform 2 Mexican dances the way you used to?
Well, they've changed drastically over the years, and I think out of necessity. When I first played them in 73, 74, somewhere in there, I was really impressed with the fact that I had learned to play really loud and fast. So I played everything fast, and I listened back, and it's like, oh, that was really awful. So, yeah, of course I've changed as my personal tastes have changed, as my knowledge has changed, my experiences have changed. And, of course, the way I play my music or the way I play anybody's music has changed drastically. I find that I'm playing things slower than I used to, and I take more pleasure in the fact that if you play a little slower, you have more expression note to note, rather than if you play really fast, your expression is in larger groups of notes. And I enjoy trying to be more expressive with every single note as I've gotten older. So I play things slower. So yeah, of course things have changed.
Yeah.
One other famous marimba player that I heard talk about a very similar question was Keiko Ave. And she said when she was very young, she wanted to write a piece about love. So it's not her tune, so to speak, but she wrote her Pièce d'amour, which is a love song for marimba. And then, after she had lived for many years and, had experienced love and, things like that, she decided she wanted to write another piece, like the mature version of that, and that's Marimba d'Amour that we know today. And it's really interesting hearing the contrast, because the first one's like almost a childish tune. It's very polite the whole time, and the other one has like this certain like primal, like, there's a lot of like anger and heartbreak in it, but also the very powerful emotion of love. And that those two pieces, I think, are kind of bookends to, the sort of exact topic that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Do you ever, Gordon, do you ever look back on older pieces of yours and have, because you've changed so much, think, oh man, I can't believe I wrote that, or I kind of even wish I had never written that, I'd like to get rid of it. I was talking with this with Eric Genevin off and on, and we were talking about like our older works and like ourselves as less mature composers and how you kind of want to be thought of today, but what you had put out, yesterday.
Yeah, it does happen. There are a few. I mean, I've been fortunate that basically anything I've written has become published. So now there's some of those pieces I look back at and said, maybe I shouldn't have really published that piece. It doesn't really kind of stand up to the quality of most of the rest of them, even though it's okay. Like I wrote a diptych for marimba, solo, and multiple percussion. And almost nobody's ever played it. I played it with Lee Stevens at a PASIC, and maybe it's never been played since, and maybe there's a good reason for that.
What about the Out to Pasture piece?
Ah, well, see, that was never written down or published, but that's a classic.
I've got it.
You've got it, yeah.
I've got it. I want to do it here.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Oh, it's hilarious. Yeah, it's fantastic. This is a piece Gordon wrote that we did at the Birch Creek Marimba Festival with Ben Walland, and it's just fantastic. Hey, speaking of composition, we have a question from Paul Mollette. What is your process of composing, and how has your compositional style changed over the years, if at all?
Well, that's probably impossible to really talk about in a short time. But I think my compositional technique has gotten better over the years, which means I get my ideas down more clearly on paper or in the computer before I get them confused. So I'm able to work faster now than I used to. I'm able to say, work on a piece 10 minutes today, 20 minutes tomorrow, take a week off, come back to it for 15 minutes, and still find that I'm making progress. Whereas before, I used to have 2-3 hour blocks in order to really get into composing. Now I can take the time between lessons and get some little thing done, and etc. So my style, I guess it's gotten more tonal, if anything, over the years. Since sedimental structures, rumble strips, which are kind of in that atonal realm, more of the recent works are more tonally conceived of. So I'm really interested, especially in harmonic progressions and harmonies, more than I was when I was younger, I think.
I actually have a question to tie into this. I know it seems like a lot of younger players are very interested in composing, which I think is very cool. But one thing that I think is special about Gordon in particular is you studied composition with Warren Benson. Is that correct? And you had a couple of other composition teachers in there as well, right?
My first year of college, I studied with Joe Schwantner. Then I studied with Sam Adler for 2 years, and 3 years with Warren Benson.
Okay. So my question is, with like the younger players that want to start composing, some people say like, oh, if you want to start composing, just do. You don't need to study composition. And I think that's kind of a nice thought, but at the same time, it is something that can be trained and that you can really learn more about and evolve as a composer. So what's your take on younger players that want to start composing? Should they just start composing? Should they seek help first, or Do you need compositional training to be a composer?
They should start composing right away if they've got ideas, but they should also seek out help from professional teachers.
What if they want to compose but they don't have ideas?
Well, then maybe they better get to the teacher first, and that teacher maybe or perhaps can teach them how to come up with ideas.
See, now that's really interesting to me because I've heard people say, and students specifically say, I want to be a composer, and I say, oh, what have you composed? And they say, well, nothing yet. It's like, well, if you want to be a composer, you would be composing. Like, you want to do it. It's like, oh, you want to be known as a composer, or you think that's a good way to make money or something, which that's insane. But, you know, but you know what I mean? Like, it's like, no, if you wanted to do it, you'd be doing it, you know? Like, how do you even know you want to do it unless you've already done it? I think it's a difference between doing and have done, you know?
I agree with you, Casey.
Who's that author, Casey, that says, you know, some people like the idea of being an author instead of liking being able to write?
Right, yeah, Robin Hobb. She's a fantasy novelist. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, good memory, Laurel.
You want to be a composer? Start by getting a black turtleneck and some circular plexus.
Yeah, it's all about the attitude.
Coffee shop, not Starbucks.
Just
yeah. You need to have all percussionist friends and enjoy craft beer. That's how you're a composer.
Yeah. Well, we have kind of I think the meatiest question of all of them, and it's from Lucas Garner on Facebook. He would like to ask Mr. Stout. This is kind of a doozy, so I might paraphrase a little bit. What do you think about the current state of solo marimba repertoire? There are a large and still growing number of marimba solos being written all the time, yet it seems that only a few major composers are still writing for the instrument, like Alejandro Vinao, Paul Lansky, Steve Mackey, and maybe just a few others. Actually, let's leave it right there.
Yeah, I'm glad you got to this question because I take quarrel with that question. I took about a half an hour last night and wrote a list of major composers that have written for marimba. That list includes Paul Simon, includes Chick Corea, includes Gunther Schuller, Jacob Druckmann, Joseph Schwantner, Chen Yi, Louis Andriessen, Anna Agnatovich, Andrew Thomas, David Maslanka, Dan Levitan, John Thrower, Anders Koppel, Matthias Schmidt, Minoru Miki, and I mean I could go on and on and on.
He's got it in red ink.
Peter Quatsow, Roger Rendels, Andy Akio, not to mention the old guys like Creston Mio, Kirka Ovanas, and not to mention people like Casey and I believe have written some major works. So I consider myself in there. Casey is in there. Kevin Bobo is in there. Michael Burrett, Dave Friedman, Dave Samuels, Emmanuel Sejourne, Ney Rosario, Keiko Abe, for God's sakes, Nebojsa Zivkovic. I mean, there is a ton of music written by major composers. I don't think there's a problem here.
Yeah, I think it's...
Also, he says, part of the question is he says... where was it?
Have we finally reached a point?
Have we finally reached a point? Like, well, of course, like Gordon just routed off a ton of names. Like, yes, we have enough repertoire now. You can do a great recital of all really good heavy music. But of course, like, there's no reason to stop at any point. I think, you know, we can continue commission composers and composing works ourselves until the cows come home, really.
Yeah, I wrote also a little note here. There have been many points of importance along the way in the last 75 years for the development of marimba repertoire, but that timeline is not stopping.
Yeah.
It's going to continue into the future.
And also, this maybe stating a little bit of the obvious, but as technique has evolved, now we have players that can do things that were once thought impossible, and that contributes to the repertoire as well, because now you can write things you used to not be able to write.
Yeah.
I really love your response, and of course, thanks so much for the compliment. That's huge.
One of my students is playing one of your marimba pieces right now. I wish I could remember the title, but it's a beautiful piece, Casey.
I think he said character number 5. Is it?
Yeah, character number 5. What a beautiful piece, Casey.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. That's too kind. You know, I think of course I love the answer, and I perfectly agree. I think what Lucas, I wonder, I'm totally speculating. I wonder if what he's getting at is major composers that the rest of the world like sort of acknowledges, if you will, as major composers. Like they often.
Those, and another one that comes to mind is Kevin Puss. Like these are like Pulitzer Prize winners. These aren't like just marimba composers, you know.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, you're right. Oh, you mean Gordon's list?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. But isn't there this thing out there, and I think percussionists have it, where they're so desperate for a work by like a Beethoven, like they're so desperate for something that the violinists are having also, that when they do see like, well, Casey Cangelosi, that's, you know, not recognized by the piano world.
Yeah, but I mean, like all those great piano composers, like, I'm sorry, Debussy's not going to write anything for the marimba, you know. Like we have to find our Debussys today, and
yeah, and here's one that I haven't mentioned that you might put in that category, Toru Takemitsu. Recently, he wrote a marimba concerto. I missed that one somehow, but that's a pretty major composer.
Yeah.
Is that the one that doesn't have any violins?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think Bill Kahn mentioned it to me.
We studied, I think it was that one in Bill Mersch's percussion literature class, and I think if I'm correct, there are no violins in this concerto, and because of that, it doesn't get played that often because no orchestra wants to pay all these violins to not play. Basically.
You know, of course I agree with you guys. Just for the sake of discussion, you do hear people talk about it, and percussionists especially, they do talk about the composers and then the percussion composers.
Now, actually, I have a question that I think that might funnel this question into like a kind of more productive direction here. I remember I took a lesson with Shi Wu about 5 years ago. And she said she had been talking to Alejandro Vinao, who was asking her about holes in the repertoire, like what holes exist in the repertoire. And she said, like, I really think that a composer like Alejandro Vinao needs to write maybe some works for younger players. That's like a huge hole. And Nancy Zeltsman certainly addressed that with her IMM series to a very large extent. But are there any holes, Gordon, that you see in the repertoire, either certain composers you would love to see or certain, I don't know, styles of pieces is the right word, but are there any holes in particular that you would like to see filled in the repertoire?
I'm not sure that I have any particular ideas about holes right now, but more and more in recent years I've become interested in getting back to playing more chamber music with marimba and other instruments, because otherwise we're just preaching to the converted. And I think we have to continue to find ways to make other people want to have the experience of playing and performing with marimba players.
And actually, on this note, I think I would love to see actually more people commission some of these composers to write like snare drum works, because I can rattle off 1,000 marimba pieces I'd love to hear on a recital, but maybe 10 snare drum works I can think of off the top of my head that I'd like to hear on a solo recital of some sort. Like I'd love to hear what Joe Schwantner or Chin Yi has to say about solo snare drum.
Yeah, just to chime in on that, there is a collection of works by Noble and Cooley that has snare drum works by
the Noble Snare Collection.
Yeah, I mean, there's some pretty big-name composers in that group that have written for solo snare drum. And the other thing, because I know we're running out of time, I think this idea of the consortium commissioning thing that's been happening more and more is a great way to get some of these quote-unquote big-name composers to write for us.
You know, and I just want to add, I feel like this compartmentalizing of composers, I only hear it from percussionists. It's like it's the percussionists. What is it? It's the leftover fear of I'm just the person who plays the triangle in the orchestra, and anyone could do that because it's not, you know. And is our craft legitimate? I feel like that attitude comes from that. So they push back by saying like, no, look, we have we have a Vinao piece. We're just like you guys. The world takes us just as valid as all the other instruments. But what's really interesting is when I talk to other instrumentalists, they always say like, hey, your compositions are so cool, and the Gordon Stout compositions are so cool. They don't have that compartmentalizing thing. So it's so interesting that the world that we're trying to be a part of actually already is very accepting of our composers.
Mm-hmm.
One thing kind of in a similar vein that I like to think about is, like I said, like Debussy, Chopin, great composers will never write anything for the marimba, I guarantee it. But someone like Elliott Carter that wrote his timpani pieces, I would almost guarantee that Elliott Carter's timpani pieces are performed more than any of his other works, maybe even combined. And it's unique to me that, like, when Kevin Putz writes a marimba piece, like, that's actually going to be one of his most performed works compared to, if you were to write a symphonic work, maybe 2 performances a year or something like that, tops,
Well, that's exactly what I mean, because everyone's going like, we got something, like, just play it.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of, there's this great insecurity that you're talking about, Casey, and I wonder if some of it comes from, like, we do have a lot of music written by players, which is fine, and you need it, but to relate to an earlier question, I wonder if they are, trained as composers as well, because that seems like part of the problem. There are pieces and there are tons of them, but maybe we can tell that they're not as compositionally sound, and so then we're afraid and we forget that great music can appear in any place, out of any person. Just a real quick kind of story, it makes me think of this 6-year-old that I was giving piano lessons to at one point, and she wanted to write a song and had no idea about chords or harmony and loved atonal sounds. And so she was this 6-year-old, and we wrote this little song based on the story that she wrote, and it's this total atonal piece, and who knows what this girl's going to end up doing, but she could do something great, and what she did was
end up dropping
fantastic.
acid in high school.
I mean, maybe, but do you know what I'm saying though? Like,
yeah.
Great creativity, great ideas, and I was not about to pollute that.
Yeah, well, it's like what we talked about Xenakis last week. It's like, Xenakis to study and try and duplicate what Bach did would have been maybe the dumbest thing of all time. So yeah, I totally get that. Real quick, one name I keep saying when we're talking about all these composers is Kevin Putz, because he wrote maybe my favorite chamber work ever, which is his Legions Will Rise, or is it Legions Must Rise or Will Rise?
Yeah.
It's for marimba, clarinet, and violin. And Gordon was talking about he's starting to love the idea all over again of marimba and chamber works. What are some of your other favorite chamber works for marimba, or maybe even just percussion in general, with non-percussion instruments?
Wow. I'm being put on the spot, and there aren't any particular titles coming forward. Of course, I spent a lot of time with Alec Wilder many years ago, flute marimba, trumpet and marimba, woodwind quintet marimba. I played with a trumpet player for 25 years. We had many works written for trumpet and marimba.
And you recorded a CD with Brian Bowman as well, right?
I recorded with Brian Bowman. I love playing with organ, although that's mostly percussion music.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, I stepped in for Nancy and Sharon and did some of the Zeltzman or the Mermelin premieres some years ago, and I love that combination. I'd love to do more with string quartet. I love marimba and flute, and I've written a couple of works with marimba and flute, one with marimba and 2 flutes, and another work that's not even been played yet for marimba and flute. So I love that combination.
There's a Takamitsu work for marimba and flute as well, right?
Yes.
I can't remember the title.
And there's an Elliott Carter work for marimba, flute, and clarinet.
Yeah, or the Klatzow also.
The Klatzow.
Yeah.
So nothing really pops out of my mind right now. I love Erica Wazen, has written some beautiful works with marimba and other instruments.
You know, I think it is very telling with, and I hope Lucas doesn't feel like he got picked on by us, but I think it is very telling that, you know, there is this really big list of stuff that's out there, but the ones that have you know, stuck out in this person's head are just a few, and I wonder why. I wonder why that is. Like, why aren't all those works known more? And
for anyone that wants like a great kind of starting point with this, if you actually want a list, Nancy Zeltzman has a great list of marimba repertoire. It's divided into different categories, you know, like based on difficulty level, and there's some works by percussionist composers like Keiko Abe, but there's also the Gunther Schuller and Jacob Druckmann. All those sorts of works are on there. And I go back to that list often because I forget how many great works there are when I'm trying to think of, you know, a new piece.
If I've said this before, but I don't think I've said it on the show. If you want to have an interesting discovery, go on IMSLP and just pick a letter and go to a composer that you've never heard of, and preferably one you can't find anything about because they're out there. And download one of their, say, piano pieces and play through it, and you might find, if you have the experience I did, that there's some really bad stuff out there that was written in the past. And I feel like, you know, as composers are learning to write for instruments, you have a lot of test pieces, and you have a lot of pieces that don't stick. And I'm just saying this based off that one experience, because I definitely saw it, you know.
There's a funny story about the Beethoven Pastoral Symphony. I'll probably butcher the story. I had a great music history teacher that told us this, but it was something like one of his piano pieces or something like that was published, and on the back it had other works by the same publisher, and there was someone else had written a pastoral symphony, and he got the idea from that, and it turns out that other work was just complete crap. But Beethoven's, you know, turned out so well.
It's really interesting. I mean, in this thing, people will say, I want music by non-percussion composers for percussion, and I keep thinking, well, like, I don't know, Beethoven was a player, Mozart was a player, Bach was a player, like all these people were players, you know, and they kind of taught the rest of the world how to write for those instruments. So we should have some percussion people like that too. Yeah. And if you think about that and combine that with the evidence that I've seen on IMSLP, it's pretty clear, like, yeah, we need to go through the same thing the other instruments got to go through, and that would entail people who know how to play percussion instruments and also know how to compose. And of course, part of that natural journey is having ones that don't know how to do it. So yeah, we'll have those also.
When you work with a composer, a non-percussionist that's writing a piece for you, you often have to show them, this is how we play marimba, this is what you can do, you can't write intervals this large because we can't reach them, that sort of thing. So that, you know, even a composer will need to become a performer in their own mind to a certain extent to know what can be done on the instrument, you know?
Yeah.
That was fun. I hope we made everyone really mad. I hope we might have. Hey, I think it's time to wrap, but you guys, Mr. Gordon Stout, do you have anything coming up that you'd like to tell people about, or anything that we can keep our eye out for that you're working on recently, or anything exciting?
The most exciting thing in my life right now, in a couple of weekends at Kuntztown University in Pennsylvania, is the Musser Marimba Festival. Something, I can't remember the exact title of it, but we're going to have a marimba orchestra of 150 people commemorating the anniversary of Musser's Marimba Symphony International. And
is it the 100th anniversary?
Yeah, and we're doing a new piece of mine that I wrote in a kind of concerto grosso-like style, featuring Bob Becker and Yurika Kimura as the soloists with the marimba orchestra backing them. So in the solo part there maybe it's like one marimba 1, one marimba 2 backing the soloist, and other times then the full 150 piece will come in, and I'm very excited to see how this piece turns out. It's my 4th composition for marimba orchestra. I'm just crazy enough that I keep writing for marimba orchestra.
Well, wonderful. Well, to all the young people out there, if you are not hip to Gordon Stout, you definitely need to be. And I don't think I've ever said that about anyone on the show at this point yet. So yeah, please get yourself hip to Gordon Stout. And
oh, will that concert be live streamed? Do you know?
I don't think so, but I'll check. And
Okay.
I'll let Ben know, and he can let you all know.
cool. Thanks so much for joining us. It's like an honor, and it's just so cool. And everyone, Gordon Stout is just such an icon in the world of percussion. So anyway, sincere thank you.
Thank you, Casey, Laurel, and Ben.
Yeah,
Thanks for
cool.
being
Okay.
here.
Well, next week we got is it Matt and Amy? Laurel? Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, chamber duo, marimba and mostly bass clarinet, sometimes clarinet.
Cool. It'll be fun. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Cool. Bye.